the wealth they tried to erase, and the lie you were taught. What if everything you were taught about Africa was wrong? What if I told you that long before skyscrapers in New York, before castles in Europe, before banks, stock markets, and billionaires, there was an African empire so wealthy that when its king traveled across the world, he accidentally destroyed entire economies, not with bombs, not with armies, but with gold. Yet today, in most classrooms around the world, Africa is shown as poor, undeveloped, and dependent. So how did a continent that once controlled the world's gold become known as the poorest? This is the story they never wanted told. This is the story of the Mali Empire. And this is FactZone, the world before the lie. Before we talk about kings and gold, you must understand something. The world you see today, with Europe and America at the top, is not how history began. In the year 1000 AD, Europe was weak. Most Europeans were farmers. Many couldn't read. Cities were dirty, small, and dangerous. But at the same time, across the Sahara Desert, an African superpower was rising. Its name was Mali. Mali was not a tribe. It was not a village. It was a global empire. It controlled trade routes stretching thousands of miles. It connected Africa to the Middle East and Asia, and it sat on something priceless: gold. At that time, gold was more valuable than oil is today, and Mali had it. The gold that controlled the world. More than half of the world's gold came from Mali. Not Europe, not China, Mali. Every gold coin in Europe, every royal crown, every cathedral decoration was built with African gold. Mali did not just trade gold, it controlled the supply. And when you control supply, you control power. Mali became so rich that even faraway kings in Europe knew its name, but they didn't want to admit it, because in their minds, Africa was not supposed to lead. Timbuktu, the city of light. Inside Mali was a city that shocked the world. Its name was Timbuktu. Today, people think Timbuktu means a faraway poor place. That is a lie. Timbuktu was once one of the richest and smartest cities on earth. It had universities, libraries, scholars, doctors, architects, students, traveled from North Africa and the Middle East just to study there. While Europe was burning books, Timbuktu was collecting them. While Europe feared knowledge, Timbuktu protected it. But the world does not like it when Africa shines. The rise of Mansa Musa. In 1312, a man took the throne of Mali. His name was Mansa Musa. History calls him the richest man who ever lived. But history doesn't tell you why. Mansa Musa inherited not just gold, he inherited a system that controlled global trade. Mali sold gold, salt, ivory, knowledge. Caravans crossed deserts to reach his empire. His treasury never ran dry. And then he did something that changed the world forever. He decided to go on pilgrimage to Mecca. The journey that shocked the world. Mansa Musa didn't travel like a normal king. He traveled like a moving city. He took 60,000 people, 12,000 servants, 100 camels loaded with gold. As he passed through Egypt, he gave away gold to everyone. The poor, the merchants, the rulers. He gave so much gold that gold lost value. For over 10 years, Egypt's economy struggled because of him. That is how rich Mali was. The world was stunned. Europe was terrified when the maps changed. After Mansa Musa's journey, something strange happened. European map makers started drawing African kings on their maps, holding gold. They finally saw Africa as a threat. Because if Africa controlled wealth, then Europe did not, and Europe could not allow that. The beginning of the betrayal. After Mansa Musa died, internal problems began. Leaders fought for power, corruption spread, unity broke. That is when outsiders moved in. Trade routes were changed, ships replaced caravans. Mali was cut off from global wealth, not by war, but by manipulation. How history was erased. When Europeans later colonized Africa, they rewrote history. They made Africa look empty, poor, backward. They did not want the world to know that Africa once ruled global wealth, because if people knew, the lies of superiority would collapse. The lost books of Timbuktu. Timbuktu had over 700,000 ancient manuscripts. They covered medicine, astronomy, law, philosophy, but many were destroyed.
Quickly
Many
now,
were stolen.
before they find us.
Many were hidden.
The seals are
because
intact.
knowledge is
Seal
dangerous.
the vault.
Why this story matters. The Mali Empire was not poor. It was looted. Its story was not forgotten. It was buried. And when you don't know your past, someone else controls your future. This is why FactZone exists, to bring back the truth. The empire the world couldn't control. After Mansa Musa died, Mali was still rich, still powerful, still respected. But something had changed. The world had now seen Mali's gold. Europe had now tasted what Africa possessed. And once the outside world discovers your wealth, you never truly own it again. Foreign merchants, traders, and diplomats began arriving not just to trade, but to study Mali. They mapped its trade routes. They learned where the gold came from. They observed its politics. Mali wasn't being visited, it was being measured. Because conquest does not begin with soldiers, it begins with information. The war that was never declared. Mali was not defeated by a foreign army. It was defeated by something more dangerous. Economic warfare. European traders slowly changed trade routes away from the Sahara. Instead of crossing deserts, gold was shipped through the ocean. Instead of passing through Mali, wealth now went directly to European ports. Mali didn't lose its gold. It lost control over who sold it. And when you lose control of trade, you lose power. This is how empires fall without a single sword being raised. When the lies began. As Mali weakened, a new story was created. Europe began writing Africa as savage, uncivilized, empty, in need of saving. But this was a lie. Because you cannot steal from a civilization you admit is advanced. You must first make it look worthless. So Africa's greatness was erased. The books they didn't want you to read. In Timbuktu, scholars were still writing, still teaching, still preserving knowledge that Europe had lost. But when colonization arrived, the libraries were raided, the manuscripts were burned, the knowledge was stolen. Why? Because if Africans knew they once ruled science, wealth, and law, they would never accept chains. The richest land, the poorest people. Mali sits on gold, uranium, oil, rare earth minerals. Yet its people remain poor. Why? Because colonial systems never left. They just changed uniforms. Africa still exports raw wealth and buys back finished products. That is not freedom. That is economic slavery, the greatest theft in history. What was stolen from Africa was not just gold, it was identity. When you erase a people's past, you control their future. Mali was not defeated, it was deleted. Why they never teach this? If schools taught Africa once ruled the gold supply, African cities had universities before Europe, African kings were richer than any European royal, then the world would ask, who really built civilization? And some people don't want that question answered. The truth returns. Mali is still there. Its gold is still there. Its history is still waiting. And now, so is the truth. This is why FactZone exists. Because history doesn't belong to those who write it. It belongs to those who uncover it. Even after Mali fell, its influence never disappeared. Most people think empires die when their flags come down. But real empires live on through systems. The gold routes that Mali built became the foundation of global trade. The banking systems of Europe were fueled by African wealth. The cities of Europe rose on African gold. Mali didn't just make kings rich. It made modern capitalism possible, yet not a single European monument admits where that wealth came from.
Forgotten empire.
The invisible
rising from the
colonization.
sand.
When European ships arrived on Africa's coast, they didn't come to fight. They came to replace. They replaced African traders with European companies, African currencies with European money, African laws with colonial systems. The flags changed, but the extraction stayed. That's why Mali is still rich in minerals but poor in people's lives. The wealth beneath your feet. Mali today sits on one of the largest gold reserves in Africa, uranium used in nuclear power, rare minerals for smartphones. But who controls it? Foreign corporations. The same system that stole Mali's wealth 600 years ago still exists, just in a new form. The manuscripts they couldn't destroy, When invaders came to Timbuktu, local families did something heroic. They hid the ancient books, buried them, smuggled them, protected them. Why? Because those books proved Africa was never inferior. Some of those manuscripts describe medical surgery, astronomy, complex law, written by Africans centuries ago. Why Africa was made to forget. Colonization didn't just steal land, it stole memory. When you erase someone's history, you make them believe they have none. That is the greatest control of all. The biggest lie ever told. The biggest lie in history is not that Africa was poor. It is that Africa needed saving. Mali proves the opposite. It was Africa that once financed the world. The truth returns. Mali is not just a fallen empire. It is a warning. When you let others control your story, they will control your future. Subscribe to FactZone because some truths are too powerful to stay buried.